Hi there, everyone. This is my EDL 851 case study, A Good Teacher Turns Bad. My name is Samuel Simmons. I hope you enjoy it. A brief summary of the case study. This case study is about a former teacher of the year who unfortunately is dealing with some personal issues that are ultimately affecting her ability to do her job. Category 1, problem identification and analysis. So what do we know? We know we're dealing with Crestview Elementary, located in a rural area. There's 3 elementary schools in this school district. Mrs. Jean Wilson is the principal. She's in her 4th year of leading Crestview Elementary. It was the end of her 3rd year after spring break, so approximately right around 4th quarter, where she started receiving phone calls from the superintendent, in which the Board of Education was informed that Mrs. Horton has been embarrassing the students, yelling at the students, causing students to have anxiety and crying in the morning and just not wanting to go to school. So a lot of problems with Mrs. Horton's ability to do her duties as an educator. It really also started with again the 4th year for Mrs. Wilson, where they were piloting a new reading program, and Mrs. Horton completely disagreed with it, in which she berated her colleagues, and again just her personal issues at home with her husband moving out and her leaving her to raise her 2 boys is really affecting her ability to do her duties as a 1st grade teacher. So what do we need to know? So some questions I had, or just some thoughts I had about going through this case study, is I'm curious of what do the other students say. Obviously, we know what Mr. Stafford's daughter, Julie, has told her father, because her father had the parents' conference with Mrs. Horton and Mrs. Wilson. But I'm curious what other students say about the behavior of Mrs. Horton. The case study did not give any other information about um, staff or employees and colleagues of Mrs. Horton. So what are their opinions about her ability to do her job and her behavior in her classroom? What does the data say from regular classroom visits? Obviously, I know that in the case study, it said that Mrs. Wilson did not acknowledge seeing any of the behaviors that were noticed by parents, and that were presented by parents calling either the Board of Education or the superintendent. Again, but is there any other data that would suggest that maybe something was missed by Crestview? Another question I had deals directly with Mrs. Horton, and just I'm curious why she's late, and how come she refuses to hold parent-teacher conferences. Is there any support interventions for teachers, whether it's district provided? I know this is a small community, rural community, but is there anything through the city, the county, or the school district that could help support Mrs. Horton in her time of need? And I'm also extremely curious of what my superintendent thinks and what the Board of Education thinks. So, what is the problem? Obviously, the problem is all centered around Mrs. Horton's behavior, her recent behavior. Again, as a former teacher of the year, it, if she's been voted teacher of the year, then obviously she is more than capable, and she may be even highly qualified to do her job. But the verbal abuse towards students, embarrassing students, her combative attitude towards her colleagues, showing up late on a regular basis. And just her personal issues, are definitely all are the overarching problems, for Crestview, Mrs. Wilson, as well as Mrs. Horton. Being a small community is definitely a problem because parents want out of her class. And obviously, there's 3 elementary schools, but still, I have to imagine that placement options are limited. So it's definitely a problem if a significant amount of parents want their child out of her class. And now that the superintendent and the Board of Education are involved, that is definitely a problem that hopefully Crestview and Mrs. Wilson can work around and through, so that Mrs. Horton can work through her problems and hopefully keep her job. So category 2, proposed plan. So now we're talking about appropriate strategies for implementation. So the first thing I need to do, I need to meet with Mrs. Horton. I need to find the root cause of her behavior. Obviously, we can push it towards her personal issues at home, but is there, something that we can pinpoint that could really help us as we work to work through some of the things that she's dealing with? I want to give her an opportunity to reflect on the behavior, her behavior, especially with the parent-teacher conference, as well as I want to provide her with some data from observations and walkthroughs, as well as inform her of what I was told by the Board of Education and the superintendent. I need to interview staff and students, Obviously, starting with Mr. Stafford's daughter, Julie. Meet with the superintendent and the school board. I want to be able to understand what are the complaints, what are the suggestions that they may have that can help us, implement strategies to help Mrs. Horton. Another step for implementation of a strategy would maybe be to find Mrs. Horton a collaborative partner, maybe a cooperative teacher. Again, I know small rural community, but is there someone else that could co-teach with her at times, that could really help her? If she feels there's a trigger that we found from our evaluation together from her, that can really pinpoint that root cause. Classroom management training, BIS training, some type of intervention that could really help Mrs. Horton deal with the language that is the problem and her behavior and her attitude towards the children. So maybe some type of professional development could really be a strategy that we could implement to help Mrs. Horton as well as the rest of our staff. Collaborative parent-teacher conferences, and we can have those with the administrator, the teacher, the superintendent, as well as maybe a colleague or a team of teachers to really assist Mrs. Horton. And then probably one of the first things we need to do after meeting, while meeting with Mrs. Horton, is to review district and school policies and procedures, with discipline and dealing with students and parents and all those things. So again, some more appropriate strategies for implementation is obviously there needs to be certain things added to her teacher evaluation. Need to document things from observations and walkthroughs. Again, as stated, present information from complaints, and really we need to have an in-depth continuous improvement plan for Mrs. Horton that provides evidence, as you see right here. The growth plan on number 2, I would implement strategies that can be found through the Marzano teacher evaluation model, specifically in domain 4, which is the collegiality and professionalism. Element 55, 56, and 59 deal with various things such as promoting positive interactions with students, promoting positive interactions with parents, as well as with colleagues. I would also add strategies from domain 1 from the Marzano model that had to do with classroom strategies and behaviors, such as establishing and maintaining effective relationships with students. So just promoting positive interactions, making sure that she is under control and dealing with students, parents, and colleagues in a professional manner. Another strategy that I will put in place is have a support system for Mrs. Horton that she could go to collaborate with, to converse with, maybe at a time when, if we can find that root cause or that trigger, a place that she can go, to find a calming mechanism, as well as, again, as stated before, any district or city provided services. And I definitely need to make sure that I communicate to all stakeholders, especially in the small community, of the plans in place to make sure that Mrs. Horton is going to continue to work on becoming a successful teacher and make sure that their students are safe and in a safe and conducive environment to be educated. So category 3. So what is best for students? So promote the success for all students. So some things that I've talked about, and some other things that are going to definitely promote that success for all students. Again, is staff development, with classroom management. So making sure that some type of behavior implementation plan is in place that really focuses on the language and the building of positive relationships and interactions with students, staff, and parents. Also, maybe professional development on stress and relief, coping mechanisms, again, to really assist the staff and Mrs. Horton in, calming down when they feel a little bit frustrated. So again, to continue promoting the success for all students, having that detailed continuous improvement plan for Mrs. Horton, as well as all teachers, that are going to definitely highlight teacher and student evidence. That way we know when we are being successful, and we're going to celebrate that success. And hopefully we do not have to lead to some type of suspension with Mrs. Horton. Definitely in order to promote success for all students, we may have to look into transferring students, starting with Julie, whose father first met with Mrs. Horton and Mrs. Wilson. So that would be best, especially the way that Julie is feeling by not wanting to come to school. We definitely need to make sure that we address that because that would be what's best for Julie, and hopefully it may be ultimately be what's best for other students. Need to address all parent concerns that were sent to the superintendent and board of education's office as well as to the school. That way, again, we can start to pinpoint and address those specific concerns that those parents have. So as I was going through this case study, it just I can only imagine, that there has to be other staff members that possibly have personal issues that they deal with at home that they work through or they find a way to deal with so that they can successfully do their job. And again, creating that, having some type of support system for the staff, that way they can deal, with be able to balance, work as well as professional and personal lives, is definitely something that I was thinking about. It just being a former teacher of the year, I know that she has all the pedagogical skills necessary to be a successful teacher. But obviously, there's some things that she's struggling with that she needs some extra assistance with. The outburst during the parent teacher conference, as a future administrator, I'm curious, did I miss anything? Were there signs that were missed by Crestview Elementary? So what do I value as going through this case study? Obviously, relationships, relationships, relationships. Starting with the students, the teachers, the staff, the parents, as well as all stakeholders, so just continuing to value those relationships. I truly understand what Mrs. Horton is going through. It is tough to deal with personal issues and be able to, to put that block up to continually do your job in a professional manner, especially if you feel like you're doing that in isolation. And obviously, I definitely value the communication that needs to be sent out to stakeholders and staff members and everyone else. That way they can know that there are positive, that there is a plan in place to positively deal with the issues happening at Crestview so that we can all work through these together and get past them. So some unresolved issues for me that need some further investigation. I'm just curious, does Mrs. Horton still want to be a teacher? Obviously, she has the experience, former teacher of the year, but that needs to be further investigated because she could be in a transition stage in her life, personal and professional. Student placement, what do we do with the students? It's definitely going to take some time to work through those and be able to put students in the best possible situation that they can be successful. If the behavior continues with Mrs. Horton, where do we go from here? Is there suspension in place? Are there other avenues that we can take to remove her from the classroom or the building so that the students have a safe and conducive environment, to be educated? If we propose a plan, a continuous plan of action, and it's not successful, where do we go from there? That's definitely an unresolved issue. And being a small rural community, I'm just curious what the opinion of the community members are, especially after the parents' conference with Mr. Stafford. And the opinion of the superintendent and board of education are obviously, something that as a building administrator, I would have to continue to work on and work through. So how do I prove that I promoted academic success for all students? We have a plan in place with actionable steps for Mrs. Horton, continuous professional development that will cover, helping teachers deal with personal issues. We'll have her on intensive supervision with frequent observations and walkthroughs, tons of reflective and collaborative conversations. That way we can provide Mrs. Horton with actionable feedback on a daily basis, every other day basis. That way we can monitor and manage her success and celebrate that to make sure that students are safe in her classroom. Promoting the well-being of every student. Again, we will definitely highlight a behavioral management intervention plan, that focuses on language and relationship building and sustaining those relationships with students and staff. Again, through professional development, as well as conversations, as well as through a support system. That way we, building in the building, as well as any other district services, community service that may be available. So enhancing instructional capacity. So again, we have the collaborative improvement plan. That way she's going to be working with me or a colleague or some type of mentor teacher. We'll give her actionable feedback. We have the instructional strategies and elements through the examples from the Marzano study that are going to work on building and sustaining relationships, as well as being a professional in the building, as well as working through and managing some type of behavior management plan, and again, those district and city support services. That is my case study for EDL 851. I hope you guys